Welcome to Miss Scarlett. Subscribe and don't miss out on Patreon. Have fun! Annabelle quietly padded down the hallway. She'd just finished a late shift at the hospital and was looking forward to crawling into bed beside her husband, Nick. As she approached their bedroom door, she paused, noticing an unusual flicker of movement through the crack beneath. Annabelle's brow furrowed. Nick should have been fast asleep by now. Gently, she pushed the door open, expecting to find him reading or perhaps watching something on his tablet. What greeted her instead made her breath catch in her throat. There, seated at her vanity, was Nick, but not the Nick she was accustomed to seeing. This Nick wore a delicate lace chemise, the straps slipping off his broad shoulders. His legs, usually covered in dark hair, were smooth and glistening, crossed demurely at the knee, and in his hand, poised midair, was her favorite tube of ruby red lipstick. For a moment, neither of them moved. Nick's eyes, wide with panic, met Annabelle's in the mirror. The lipstick slipped from his grasp, clattering onto the vanity's surface and rolling towards the edge. Annabelle lunged forward instinctively, catching the tube just before it tumbled to the floor. As she straightened, she found herself face to face with her husband, close enough to smell the faint trace of her perfume on his skin.
Anna,
Nick's voice cracked, a mixture of fear and shame coloring his features. He scrambled to cover himself with his arms, the lace rustling softly against his skin. Annabelle took a deep breath, her mind racing to process the scene before her. She'd known Nick for over a decade, been married to him for 5 years, and yet this was entirely new territory. But as the initial shock began to fade, she found herself more intrigued than upset.
Nick,
she said softly, placing a gentle hand on his arm. It's okay. You don't have to hide from me. Nick's shoulders slumped, relief washing over him. I never meant for you to find out like this, he whispered, his eyes downcast.
I've been exploring this side of myself for a while now. I just didn't know how to tell you.
Annabelle nodded, her gaze traveling over Nick's form. The lace suited him, she realized with a start. It softened his usually rugged features, highlighting a grace she'd never noticed before. How long? She asked, genuinely curious. Nick sighed, running a hand through his hair. On and off since college, I guess, but more seriously in the last year or so. He paused, searching her face for any sign of disgust or rejection. Finding none, he continued. It started with just trying on your silky pajamas when you were working nights. Then I ordered a few things online. It makes me feel good. Free in a way I can't really explain. Annabelle nodded, processing this information. She thought back to the times she'd noticed her clothes slightly out of place, or found a smudge of her foundation on the sink. It all made sense now. Why didn't you tell me? She asked, keeping her voice gentle and free of accusation. Nick's shoulders hunched. I was scared. Terrified, really. I didn't want you to think I was some kind of freak, or that I was gay or wanted to transition or something. He looked up at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. I love you, Anna. I love our life together. This is just a part of me I needed to explore. Annabelle felt her heart swell with love for her husband. Here he was, vulnerable and exposed, trusting her with his deepest secret. She reached out, cupping his face in her hands. Nick, listen to me. You are not a freak, and even if you were gay or wanted to transition, I would support you. I love you, all of you. This doesn't change that. A single tear slipped down Nick's cheek, leaving a faint trail in the foundation he'd applied. Annabelle wiped it away with her thumb, smiling softly. Now, she said, picking up the fallen lipstick. Would you like some help with this? Your technique could use a little work. Nick let out a watery chuckle, nodding gratefully. Annabelle guided him back to the vanity, settling him onto the plush stool. She stood behind him, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "First things first," she said, reaching for her makeup remover. "Let's start with a clean canvas." As she gently wiped away the smudged foundation and uneven eyeshadow, Annabelle felt a sense of intimacy she'd never experienced before. This was Nick at his most vulnerable, his most authentic, and she was honored to be trusted with this part of him. "So," she said, applying a light moisturizer to his skin. "Do you have a name for when you're dressed like this?" Nick blinked, surprised by the question. I've thought about it, but I've never actually used one." Annabelle nodded, considering. "Well, we don't have to decide right now, but if you want one, we can figure it out together." As she worked, applying foundation with a gentle touch, Annabelle asked questions. She learned about the websites Nick visited, the online communities he'd found. She listened as he described the rush of excitement he felt when trying on a new piece of lingerie, or the satisfaction of perfectly applying a coat of nail polish.
"It's not about wanting to be a woman," Nick explained as Annabelle carefully lined his eyes. "It's more about exploring different aspects of myself, embracing my feminine side, I guess."
Annabelle nodded, understanding dawning.
"It's like playing a role, but the role is still you, just a different facet." "Exactly!"
Nick's face lit up, grateful for her comprehension. As she applied the finishing touches to Nick's makeup, Annabelle found herself admiring her work, with his strong jawline softened by contouring, his eyes emphasized by subtle, smoky shadow, and his lips painted a deep, sensual red. Nick looked beautiful. "There," she said, stepping back. "Take a look." Nick turned to the mirror, his breath catching as he took in his reflection.
"Anna,"
he whispered.
I've never looked this good before."
Annabelle smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. "You look stunning," she said honestly. "But more importantly, you look happy." Nick stood, pulling her into a tight embrace.
"Thank you,"
he murmured into her hair.
"For understanding, for accepting me."
Annabelle hugged him back, reveling in the contrast of his muscular frame and the soft lace against her cheek. "Always," she promised. As they pulled apart, Annabelle's eyes sparkled with mischief. "So," she said, "now that I know about this, does this mean I get to raid your closet too? Because I've got to say, that chemise looks way better on you than it ever did on me." Nick laughed, the sound full and rich and free in a way Annabelle had never heard before. "Deal," he said, "but only if you teach me how to walk in heels without breaking an ankle." Annabelle grinned, already mentally cataloging which of her shoes might fit him. "Oh, honey," she said, "you've got yourself a date." As the night wore on, Annabelle and Nick talked more openly than they had in years. Nick showed her his secret collection of lingerie and dresses, hidden in the back of their closet behind his suits. Annabelle offered tips on makeup application and suggested some of her favorite skincare products. "You know," Annabelle mused as she helped Nick select an outfit, "this actually explains a lot." Nick raised an eyebrow, pausing in the act of slipping on a silky camisole. "What do you mean?" Annabelle smiled, running her fingers over the soft fabric of a floral dress. "Remember last Valentine's Day, when you got me that gorgeous La Perla set?" Nick nodded, a faint blush creeping up his neck. "Well," Annabelle continued, "I always wondered how you knew exactly what size to get, and how you picked something that fit so perfectly." She shot him a knowing look. "You tried it on yourself first, didn't you?" Nick's blush deepened, but he nodded, a sheepish grin spreading across his face. Guilty as charged. I couldn't resist. It was so beautiful, and the lace was so intricate. Annabelle laughed, shaking her head fondly. Well, mystery solved. And hey, at least I know you've got great taste. As the initial excitement and nervousness began to settle, Annabelle found herself curious about the practicalities of Nick's cross-dressing. So, she said, settling onto the bed as Nick twirled in front of the full-length mirror, admiring the way the dress swished around his knees. How often do you do this? Nick paused, considering. It varies, he admitted. Sometimes I'll go weeks without feeling the urge. Other times, like lately, it's been almost every day when you're at work. Annabelle nodded, processing this information. And do you ever go out like this? Nick's eyes widened, a flicker of fear crossing his features. God, no, he said quickly. I mean, I've thought about it, dreamed about it even, but I've never had the courage. Annabelle patted the bed beside her, and Nick sat, the dress pooling around him. She took his hand, noting the chipped nail polish on his fingers. Would you want to? She asked gently. Go out, I mean. Nick was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on the back of Annabelle's hand. Maybe, he said finally. Someday. But the idea terrifies me. What if someone from work saw me? Or one of our neighbors? Annabelle squeezed his hand reassuringly. We could start small, she suggested. Maybe a weekend trip to a city where nobody knows us. Or even just a night drive, windows down, music blasting. Nick's eyes lit up at the idea, a smile tugging at his lips. That actually sounds amazing, he admitted. As they continued to talk, Annabelle found herself falling in love with Nick all over again. This new side of him, this vulnerability and openness, was intoxicating. She loved seeing the joy on his face as he tried on different outfits, the way his whole demeanor changed when he slipped into a pair of heels. You know, she said, watching as Nick carefully removed his makeup with the cleansing balm she'd recommended. I'm really glad you shared this with me, even if it wasn't exactly planned. Nick paused, meeting her eyes in the mirror. Really? He asked, a note of hesitation in his voice. Annabelle nodded emphatically. Really? I feel like I'm seeing a whole new side of you, and I love it just as much as I love every other part. Nick's eyes welled up with tears, and he turned, pulling Annabelle into a fierce hug. I love you so much, he murmured into her hair. I don't know what I did to deserve you. Annabelle held him tight, breathing in the mixed scents of her perfume and his cologne. You're just you, she said simply. That's more than enough. As the night deepened into early morning, Annabelle found herself stifling a yawn. Nick noticed, his face immediately creasing with concern. Oh God, Anna, I'm so sorry, he said, glancing at the clock. You must be exhausted after your shift, and here I am keeping you up all night. Annabelle waved off his concern with a smile. Don't apologize. This was important. And honestly, I wouldn't have missed it for the world. Nick's expression softened, love and gratitude shining in his eyes. Still, he said, we should get some sleep. You've got another shift tomorrow, don't you? Annabelle nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of fatigue settling over her. Yeah, but it's not until the afternoon. We can sleep in a bit. As they prepared for bed, Annabelle couldn't help but notice the way Nick hesitated before reaching for his usual pajamas. She touched his arm gently, understanding dawning. Hey, she said softly, if you want to wear something else to bed, that's okay. Whatever makes you comfortable. Nick's relief was palpable. He reached into the drawer, pulling out a silky nightgown. Is this all right? He asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Annabelle nodded, smiling encouragingly. Of course. It looks cozy. As they settled into bed, Annabelle found herself hyper-aware of the unfamiliar texture of Nick's nightgown against her skin. But, as Nick curled around her, his arm draping over her waist in their usual sleeping position, she felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. This was still Nick. Her Nick. Just with an added layer she hadn't known about before. And as she drifted off to sleep, Annabelle found herself excited for the journey ahead, ready to explore this new facet of their relationship together. The next morning, Annabelle woke to the soft sound of Nick's steady breathing. For a moment, she was disoriented, the events of the previous night feeling like a vivid dream. But, as she rolled over, she saw Nick still peacefully asleep. The strap of his nightgown slipped off one shoulder, and reality came rushing back. She propped herself up on one elbow, taking the opportunity to really look at her husband. In sleep, his face was relaxed, free from the tension and fear that had marked it when she'd first discovered him. The morning light filtering through the curtains cast a soft glow on his skin, and Annabelle found herself marveling at how beautiful he looked. As if sensing her gaze, Nick's eyes fluttered open. For a brief moment, panic flashed across his face, but it quickly melted into a shy smile as he remembered the acceptance and support Annabelle had shown. "Good morning," Annabelle said softly, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from his forehead. "Morning," Nick replied, his voice husky with sleep. He caught her hand, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. "How are you feeling about all of this?" Annabelle considered the question, wanting to give an honest answer. "I feel good," she said finally. "A little overwhelmed, maybe. There's a lot to process, but mostly I'm just grateful you trust me enough to share this part of yourself with me." Nick's eyes welled up with tears, and he pulled Annabelle close, burying his face in her neck. "I was so scared," he admitted, his voice muffled. "I thought I might lose you." Annabelle stroked his back soothingly, feeling the silky material of the nightgown under her fingers. "Never," she promised. "You're stuck with me, mister. All of you." They lay like that for a while, holding each other close until Nick's stomach let out a loud growl. Annabelle couldn't help but laugh, the sound breaking the emotional tension. "I guess that's our cue to get up," she said, pressing a kiss to Nick's forehead before sitting up. "How about I make us some breakfast while you get dressed?" Nick nodded, but as Annabelle stood to leave, he caught her hand. "Anna," he said, his voice hesitant, "would it be okay if I wore something of yours? Just around the house?" Annabelle felt a warm rush of affection. "Of course," she said, squeezing his hand. "My closet is your closet. Just try not to stretch out my favorite sweater, okay?" Nick's answering laugh was bright and genuine, a sound that Annabelle realized she hadn't heard nearly enough lately. As she made her way to the kitchen, she found herself smiling, excited about this new chapter in their relationship. While she busied herself with making pancakes, Nick's favorite, Annabelle's mind wandered to the future. There would be challenges, she knew, questions to answer, boundaries to establish. But as she heard Nick's footsteps approaching, she felt ready to face whatever came their way. She turned, spatula in hand, to see Nick hovering uncertainly in the doorway. He wore a flowy blouse of hers, paired with his own jeans, and had applied a light touch of makeup, just enough to enhance his features without being overly noticeable. "You look great," Annabelle said warmly, taking in the way the blouse softened Nick's broad shoulders. Nick's posture relaxed, a smile spreading across his face. "Yeah?" he asked, running a hand through his hair. It's not too much? Annabelle shook her head, turning back to flip a pancake. It's perfect. Very you. As Nick settled at the kitchen table, Annabelle couldn't help but notice the way he seemed more at ease in his own skin. His movements were fluid, almost graceful, as he reached for the syrup. So, Annabelle said, sliding a plate of pancakes in front of him, I was thinking about what you said last night, about wanting to go out dressed up, but being afraid. Nick paused, fork halfway to his mouth. Yeah, he said cautiously. Annabelle nodded, taking a seat across from him. What if we start small? Maybe have a movie night at home, but you dress up fully. Get used to being in full makeup and clothes for an extended period. Nick's eyes lit up at the suggestion. That could work, he said slowly. It would be nice to not have to rush to change before you get home. Exactly, Annabelle said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. And then, when you're comfortable with that, maybe we could try a short outing, like a quick run to the grocery store or a late-night drive-through run. Nick nodded, a mix of excitement and nervousness playing across his features. I'd like that, he admitted. It's a big step, you know. Annabelle smiled reassuringly. I know, and we'll take it at your pace. No pressure, okay? As they ate, they continued to discuss plans and possibilities. Annabelle suggested they could look into LGBT-friendly spaces in their city, places where Nick might feel more comfortable expressing himself. Nick, in turn, opened up about some of the online communities he was part of, mentioning a few local meetups he'd always been too scared to attend. Maybe we could go to one together, Annabelle suggested. If you want, I mean. I'd love to meet some of the friends you've made online. Nick's eyes widened. You'd do that? Really? Annabelle nodded emphatically. Of course. This is part of your life, Nick. I want to be involved, to understand it better. Nick's smile was radiant. You're amazing, you know that? After breakfast, as Annabelle was clearing the dishes, Nick hesitated by the sink. Anna, he said, his voice soft. There's something else I wanted to ask you about. Annabelle turned, giving him her full attention. What is it? Nick took a deep breath, steeling himself. I was wondering if you'd be willing to help me shop for some clothes, things that are actually mine, not just borrowed from you. Annabelle's face lit up. Are you kidding? I would love that! She pulled Nick into an excited hug. Oh, this is going to be so much fun! We can order online first if you're not ready for in-person shopping, and I know some great sites with inclusive sizing options. Nick laughed, his tension melting away in the face of Annabelle's enthusiasm. You've really thought about this, haven't you? Annabelle shrugged, a bit sheepish. Well, yeah, I want to support you, and, well, I may have done some research last night while you were in the shower. Nick's expression softened, love and gratitude shining in his eyes. What did I ever do to deserve you?
Thanks for watching, my girlies! Be sure to check out Patreon for more!